All right, so welcome everybody to Local History in Context, developing a public library digital exhibit curators cohort. And during this presentation, the presenters are going to discuss recent efforts to train public librarians in creating digital exhibits. The speakers today are project leaders, library curators, and advisory team members who are going to share their experiences and discuss the successes, challenges, and goals for the project's future. With us today, we have Angela Stanley, Director of Archival Services and Digital Initiatives at Georgia Public Library Service, Lauren Alford, the Reference and Genealogy Librarian at the Dougherty County Public Library, Danilo, Baylen, professor at West Georgia, Caroline Corbitt, the exhibitions graphic designer at Emory, Muriel Jackson, head of genealogy and the historical room at the Middle Georgia Regional Library, Evan Leavitt, the manager of facility operations and planning at the Ina Dillard Russell Library at Georgia College, and then finally, Gayle Schechter, the program associate for the Council on Library and Information Resources. So take it away, Angela.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you this morning. As Sheila mentioned, my name is Angela Stanley, and I am with the Georgia Public Library Service, and I am so pleased to be here this morning and to be joined by a wonderful group of colleagues from around the state. All right. So just a little bit about GPLS. In case you don't know, we're the state library here in Georgia, and we support the state's 61 public library systems with scalable technology and services, staff training, consulting, and best practices. And what this means for me is that I get to do cool things like help libraries digitize their archival and special collections for inclusion in the Digital Library of Georgia. And I also get to come up with new and interesting ways to help meet library needs. Today, I am joined by the Curators Cohort and members of the advisory team, whom Sheila has already introduced, and you can see their names and affiliations on your screen. So today I'm going to give you an overview of our Digital Exhibits Pilot Program, or what I've called DigEx for short. I'm going to begin by giving you a high-level overview of the project, followed by explanations of the need, the timeline, the lessons learned so far, and next steps. And we will also hear from our Curators Cohort and advisory team members about their experiences. So the DigEx program's goal was to train librarians at participating public libraries as exhibits curators. Utilizing a cohort structure and with the support of both an experienced advisory team and the technical expertise of the Omeka team, GPLS hoped to give public libraries the tools and training they needed to develop locally curated digital exhibits using the Omeka S platform. So we had state library managed instance of Omeka S, which allowed us to create multiple subsites, as many as we would like. So we can have an unlimited number of sites hosted through basically one install. So that makes management of the site and updating much easier using Omeka S as opposed to classic Omeka. We started off with 3 pilot sites for our inaugural year. We invited applications from interested libraries, asking them to propose an exhibit topic and provide 3 examples of relevant items from the DLG that they would use in creating their exhibit. From these applications, the advisory team selected 4 sites, though one site did have to drop out owing to time constraints. In collaboration with the advisory team and trainers from the Omeka team, I set up introductions and 3 web-based training sessions. Pilot sites were asked to provide a more detailed topic based on their proposal and complete an exhibit template. Sites met individually with the advisory team to workshop their topics and have periodically checked in during each new project deadline. Final exhibits were due at the end of May and will be publicly released later this month. No new digitization took place as part of this project, and all exhibit items had to have been available in the DLG with right statements that allowed for educational use. Exhibit sites provided their items lists to me, and I used a Python script developed by UGA's Wilson Center Digital Humanities Lab to pull metadata for those items using DLG's API. I then uploaded the records to Omeka-S using their CSV import tool. As I mentioned, we're using a hosted version of Omeka-S rather than classic Omeka because Omeka-S allows GPLS to run a single instance of Omeka with multiple independently controlled subsites issued to participating libraries, thus avoiding the administrative headaches of rolling out updates to multiple independent instances. For now, we contract with Omeka's parent organization, the Corporation for Digital Scholarship at George Mason University, to host our Omeka-S instance, but down the road, we may decide to host it ourselves as the project progresses and staffing and bandwidths change. So what gap is this project filling? Here in Georgia, we've been fortunate to have a strong statewide digitization program for public libraries, thanks to the partnership between the Digital Library of Georgia and GPLS. Since 2003, our organizations have been working together to make sure that public libraries and other small, local, or community-based organizations have access to strong representation in the DLG portal. For public libraries in particular, this means that we have roughly 70% rate of participation in the DLG across all portals and across our 60 public library systems. And this number increases if you include newspaper digitization projects. Where we were finding gaps in service, however, was in the subsequent contextualizing of these digital images in the larger historical narrative. Public libraries wanted to be able to tell the full stories of their community's histories with additional interpretation beyond the traditionally succinct description fields provided in the item and collection level records. What they were looking for was locally curated digital exhibits. So back in August 2019, I contacted Marissa Wood, statewide collaborative planning coordinator at the Colorado State Library. Marissa manages their Omeka instances for their public library and community partners. Since Omeka can be intimidating to some new users, Marissa gave me some great information about how they onboard new partners and support their continued use of the tool. I used my notes from my conversation with Marissa to draft our Omeka pilot, making some important changes for our context and capacity here in Georgia, which I discussed in the project overview. So where are we now? We are basically 99% of the way through the project timeline. The PR and final exhibits go live has been delayed slightly, though the exhibits are live on the web. Our 3 pilot sites have, as I said, completed their final exhibits, which will be announced later this month, and then we will conduct a full evaluation with all project participants. The feedback I receive, combined with the lessons I've gleaned along the way, will inform the next phase of this project. So the links to the exhibit sites are included on this slide on your screen, and these slides will be shared via Sched after the presentation, so you'll have access to these links. I'll also copy them into the chat in just a moment. And the exhibit curators will be giving you a more detailed glimpse of the sites later on in this presentation. Now we're going to hear from our advisory team members, Caroline, Danilo, and Gayle, about their experiences in the project.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, as part of the advisory team, okay, we're going to talk about 3 different parts of our experience, and I'll talk about the review proposals. If you look initially at the membership of the team, we really came from very diverse backgrounds, somebody with a museum experience like Caroline and an Omeka experience like Gayle. And then we have 2 library services, especially on special collections that are bringing in us input into our review process. And I'm coming in with an online learning visual literacy perspective. when we initially reviewed the content of the proposals, we look from what is broad and what is the focus, because the issue is that we realize that there's a time constraint. And it's very important to give that as a feedback to the curators, how much they can handle, given the time given to them in terms of their training, as well as in terms of their development. And finally, at the end of that phase, we choose the project. As Angela mentioned, there were 4, but 1 dropped out due to time constraints. So I thought that, that was a good start for the beginning of our project. And now Gayle will handle the initial feedback.
Hey everyone. So following feedback on those initial application proposals, that was when the Curators cohort attended their trainings on creating digital exhibits and using the Omeka platform, and the advisory team had the option to attend those trainings so long as our schedules permitted. The next major component that we reviewed were digital exhibit site plans, which were essentially outlines of the exhibits. The first section encompassed very basic of the exhibit description, things like title, exhibit summary, and objectives. The second section kind of covered the interpretive master plan of the exhibit. So you have sort of the big idea of the exhibit, the key messages, and the sort of critical questions that sort of shape the exhibit's educational goals that get answered by the exhibit for visitors. And then the third section of that site plan were the list of the links to items selected from Digital Library of Georgia for use in the exhibit. We read and provided feedback on those site plans and the content selection, and we were working to help the curators sort of tease out effective narratives in the aim of developing concise and clear interpretive master plans to guide the building of those exhibits. And so with my background, as Danilo mentioned, in using Omeka, both as a student and in my work back at the AUC, I was in a unique position to provide insight about the capabilities and limitations of using the Omeka platform, while our curator cohorts exhibits were still in those draft and planning stages, with the only visuals that we had being to view were the individual items. And then they moved on to the building of the exhibits. And for that, Caroline will provide some more info.
Thank you, Gayle. Hi, I'm Caroline Corbitt. The third part of this was really focusing on these dev sites, as we call them, or just the sites before we launch them, and giving feedback. So as far as the feedback for this, we really just looked at the sites. We looked at the aesthetic here, the white space, the fonts, the font size, all those things to make sure that it was looking the way it should look, giving advice on that, choosing whatever the template is that they chose, and trying to figure out how to make that look the best. Usability, something we were focusing on is accessibility, making sure that our headers were the right headers, that you read them in order of like first, second, and third, making sure that it's intuitive as you're clicking through this, it makes sense to you, it makes sense to the user, and that linking made sense as well, and that things were connected and working and functional. As far as Vicarious Learning, a lot of things as we were going through these and talking to the individuals and the libraries, we noticed that people were having similar problems, and we could connect people with similar issues so they could figure it out and learn together almost. So that was also just like, as we talked, we were figuring out and problem solving. And then as far as the rest, just minor details and getting everything to look the way it looks now. So I'm gonna pass this on to Laureen Alford in the Curators cohort. Thank you.
My name is Laureen Alford. I did the Albany, Georgia's Courthouses project. In a nutshell, to curate a digital exhibit means you're going to create a digital history, and then you're going to communicate its location and its contents to the world. There's 4 steps to doing this. First, you're going to collect your electronic items. For our project, this meant items from the Digital Library of Georgia. Now, not everything that I would have liked to collect was in the Digital Library of Georgia, so I had to make the best use of what was there and be really creative. Second, I organized my electronic items into groups. For my project, I grouped my items into courthouses, events, people, and maps. I also included a list of all exhibit items and a list of references. These groupings became the main page headings for the website, so that helped me organize the website. Then I choose the best items to include. This was not at all an easy task. There were many, many fascinating images in the Digital Library of Georgia that showed what life was like in Albany. And I had to edit ruthlessly to make sure that my exhibit was not too large or that its contents were not too far afield from the topic of the courthouses. The research that supported the narrative was the most time-consuming part of the project. Then the last step is to share it with the world. The Omeka platform makes sharing it with the world pretty easy. And then of course, we're going to use social media, press releases, and other events to publicize the exhibit. And it was a really wonderful project because it helped me to understand more about the history of the courthouses, which is something I was curious about. And then, you know, my hope is that I'm going to make visitors aware of Albany's courthouses. And even people who live in Albany probably don't know all these facts about the courthouses that are so interesting. And I learned a lot of lessons as I was doing this project. Next slide. Thank you. So I had to never forget that the exhibit visitor is new to this subject. They may not know anything about the courthouses, the legal system, or the history of Albany. A lot of visitors probably don't even know where Albany is located. I had to anticipate what questions the visitors might have when they're looking at each page and try to make sure that those questions are answered by the narrative text on the pages. I had to learn to tie the digital exhibit with the physical content in my library's collection in order to unite the physical and the digital world, and hopefully to draw in some new library users. I learned to get help from coworkers. My coworker, Rod Davis, knows HTML coding, which I don't. The images that didn't come from the Digital Library of Georgia had to be embedded in an HTML field using HTML coding, and I would not have been able to do this without help from Rod. Angela and my advisory committee members were also a huge help. Their knowledge, wisdom, and fresh perspectives helped me to correct many errors and many weaknesses in the project. I learned to revise over and over and over again. And the last lesson I'll share with you is just have confidence that you can do this. It was a huge project. It took many months to complete, but breaking it down into smaller steps made it achievable, even for someone like me who's not an IT pro. So this is the website, and what inspired this website was that my library has a collection of photographs from when the most recent county courthouse was built back in 1968. And so seeing those photographs made me curious about the history of the courthouses. So that's how I got interested in this. So on our homepage, I've got information to tell the visitors more about the project. And then I've got another subpage that's going to tells more. So that gives a little bit about the history of the project and credits for who helped us, and then we've got information down below about fair use. And then the second subpage of the homepage was the About Albany page, because a lot of people might not know anything about Albany. So I gave just a very brief history of Albany. And so then the next grouping I went through was just each courthouse. There were, we have the county courthouses and then we have the federal courthouses. So the first courthouse was built in 1855. That image that you see on that page, that is the only image of that first courthouse that I was able to find. And it was not in the Digital Library of Georgia. So that was one of the ones I had to photograph it and then upload that image using the HTML code. The second courthouse was completed in 1903. And so So I included information about that. The third one, which is the one that's standing now, it was completed in 1969. And then the post office and federal courthouse, that one was built in 1912, and the place that it was on used to actually be a circus fairgrounds. And that courthouse is where many of the Albany civil rights movement events took place. Many of those court battles took place in that little courtroom. And then the C.B. King U.S. Courthouse was completed in 2002. And it was named for Shaveen Bowers King, who was very prominent in the Albany civil rights movement. So then my second section was about the various events. So the picture you see on the screen right there is from the tornado that took place in 1940 that severely damaged the Second County Courthouse. And then there was a flood in 1925 that I included some information about that. The research, particularly about this section, took a lot of time because the only information I was able to find about it was in newspaper records that were on microfilm. So I spent a lot of time going through the microfilm reels, finding that information. And then, let's see, you saw the picture of the tornado in 1940. There were a lot of photographs on the Digital Library of Georgia of that. So I included a little item showcase at the bottom so that people could see all those different images. Then in 1966, there was a fire that pretty much demolished the second courthouse, and they were planning to tear it down already, but then that fire took place, so that kind of sped up the demolition of that. And one of the images I included on there, the line drawing that was there, we have a book at the in our library, and it has all 3 floors, and it shows the floor plan of the second courthouse, which was really interesting to see what was in there before. And then the Albany Civil Rights Movement, those were some very, very interesting events, because the Albany Civil Rights Movement started in November 1961, and it went through 1962. And Martin Luther King Jr. Spent time in the Dougherty County Jail, and he wrote about it in his diary, and I included that information on the exhibit. The section about the people, that was one of the sections, and that's the flood of 1994. So I included information about that. But the people, that was one of the more difficult sections to do because there were so many people I would have wanted to include information about, but there weren't images of those people in the Digital Library of Georgia. So I included William G. Anderson and C.B. King from the Albany Civil Rights Movement, Nelson Tift, who was the founder of Albany, and then Lewis Green Sutton was someone I had never even heard of, but because his image was in the Digital Library of Georgia, I learned more about him and I included him in there. And then I included some of the Sanborn fire insurance maps in case visitors want to look and see, on the map where the courthouse is located. I included a list of all the items so that, and we have 35 items on the website, so people can see a list of all of those. And then I had a section of all the references, and there were 30 research resources that I used as I researched this project. And Angela had to tell me, okay, Laureen, you've done enough research now, you can stop. So that was a really fun part. And I could have just kept researching, but I had to stop. So, that's my website in a nutshell.
Thanks, Laureen. We're going to pass it over to Muriel Jackson from the Middle Georgia Regional Library System.
Some of the things that Laureen said can't be denied it all, because it was, the hardest part was coming up with your topics and reducing them down. My topic was so huge that I had to just keep bringing it down. I was told I'm not writing the book, I'm just giving a brief summary, trying to pique people's interest. So examine your collections for possible topics. Then you do check the Digital Library of Georgia to see if there are images and items that you can connect to it. Once you've narrowed down your list, you need to research your topic carefully. But you don't want to get too caught up in the project because you have other duties that can get away from you while you're doing it. And the topic you want to choose is something that will pique the interest of your viewer, so they want to come in and learn more about your collections. Next slide. Some things to remember. There are things that are beyond your control. There are changes happen in software. That happened with wanting to use some of the items I wanted to use that were part of the DLG with the newspapers, and the software had changed some. So we couldn't quite, we were having to copy and embed them because we couldn't zoom in directly on that one item. That happened with city directories, and I really didn't feel that my patrons, anyone viewing the exhibit, would want to go through a 800-page city directory looking for one item. So I held off with that. And you're being limited to items in the Digital Library of Georgia. So that's your first spot. And as Laureen said, then you're going to go out, if you have a few things that you really feel that need to be in the exhibit, you're going to be doing HTML. And it helps to have some exposure. I've had some exposure to HTML, but I also found out some of the things that I knew no longer were valid to be used. I would go in, I looked at the Omeka S directive exhibits that they have to give you examples. And they are, some of them are just so massive and so wonderful, but you don't want to emulate them. You just want to use those as a starting point for ideas of what can be done. You have to allow enough time every week to work on the exhibit, but most of all, have fun with it. You know, make sure it's something you would, if you were going online and looking at something, it's something that you would be surprised and happy to see. Okay, this is my exhibit I chose to do. Information on Baylen Normal Schools, the student life in the 1930s. Baylen Normal was an American missionary school founded here in Macon in the 1860s by the American Missionary Association. We had a massive collection because students that attended there did two massive grand reunions in the late 1980s and in the 1990s. So we had collected a lot of information. Oh, I can go next. Okay, next. We did an about this page and some of the things we wanted to make sure we had the fair use, the takedown request, but also the harmful language. There were a few articles I made the decision not to use because of the terminology that was used to describe African Americans at that time was just so offensive. That's another thing when you're doing it, if you're picking a topic that will, that could present interesting dilemmas, you have to think about that. Next. The hard part was narrowing down the topic. They will tell you that my Lewis High Baylen Normal, it was originally Lewis High School and then it became Baylen Normal. I had about 10 pages alone just on that, but that was too much. So we narrowed it down to give a short history of the project. And most of the pictures in here are ones that we had in our reunion collection that we learned how to embed and to tweak and add all of these things in. Down here at the bottom, I stumbled across this that was, it was originally the in Error of Progress and Promise at the bottom. I found that on the North Carolina digital site, but I kept searching and then I found it on the Library of Congress site. And I liked the way it presented better than the North Carolina. So that's something else. If you find it online, just keep working your way back till you find someone, you know, someone like the Library of Congress, that way you shouldn't have any problems with copyright issues because they give you all the information pretty straightforward. Next. And then we did a second part for when they moved to their last location. We had pictures of the new campus, the Sanborn maps. We even had this picture of with the pandemic. This is the only picture we've ever found of the Spanish flu pandemic. And I thought it was so timely to show that even back then, there were restrictions on people. And I had to mention Mr. Von Tobel because he took the school where it was, and he's still remembered by this children and grandchildren of students who talked about him all the time with their children. Next. So we decided to focus in on student life. There were a lot of papers that are written on the American Missionary School, but it never talks about the students and what they had to do. So we started going through everything, and I looked and decided we talk about the parents making the decision to come up with the money to send their children to a private school during the Depression. So I just wanted to highlight some of the things. Ballard graduated, there were over 3,000 graduates from the school. So we had some nice images of that. So I just wanted to give people an idea of how much it would cost. This picture came out of the Digital Library of Georgia. So we talked about the classes and the things the students had, because the school progressed from just being one that was originally just for teachers only, and then they started domestic arts classes and vocational schools, to eventually even having commercial classes available. So this happened to be a report card that someone had given us. We have a number of scrapbooks, which made the project even more exciting to work on. And I did learn a lot more than I knew. Getting to the main focus of student life, we just talked about the main clubs and organizations so that we didn't get bogged down into too much. One thing I was surprised to see was that Congressman Arthur Weggs Mitchell, who was the only African-American Congress at the time, actually came and spoke in Macon, and the students had a student newspaper that highlighted that as well. Trying to find images for some of the topics was interesting. Just chapel, it was a student assembly they had once a month. So this picture proved to be the perfect image to work with that. So that's something else. Your picture doesn't always exactly about what you're talking about, but it gives an idea of what you're talking about. This club was very popular. So I found the picture of the students and then wrote on that since I had an image to go with it. They had a student council, which was very interesting. It was one of the earliest ones in the area. So we put a picture in there and talked about what the students would do there. This was the one that proved to be, I had heard of high Y and tri-high Y clubs before, but I didn't understand them until I got into this. And so we were very lucky to have a lot of information. It dealt with the YMCA, and it had a Christian-based effort with the students, different schools, public as well as private. And so we did something about each one of those. And that proved to be my lengthiest page. We didn't have a lot, but the student newspapers here was my primary source, because most of it started in the 30s, and we had about 20 of those, which gave me a great overview of what life was about so I could research more. And so we were thrilled to have that. Drama club, these drama programs the students drew, we have several, are drawn by a local artist who's now deceased, who was well known, but the students did those, so those were scrapbook collections. This page, the first one, which the small one, is actually from the Digital Library of Georgia, which was in the our Douglas Theater collection, Blues, and I forgot the full title of it, but it's linked there. So it gives you all of the information about it. And this collection for the Douglas is very important to us. And then we had pictures of the Glee Club, and then one of the bands that were started by the National Youth Administration during the Depression. And then we focused in on sports, because every school had sports. And I love this picture because it gives an example of the 4 types of activities. And something I noticed going through everything for Ballard, they always branded themselves. If it was a sport, they put it on the baseball, basketball, football. They always, most things like the picture of the Glee Club, they had a banner there. So they were masters at branding themselves from the beginning. One of the things that impressed me, I stumbled across the track and field team. It actually showed that Jesse Owings came here after the Olympics, and there was an exhibition with students from Ballard and as well as Central City College that took place here in Macon. So like I said, you learn something new when you're working. Next. Picture of the baseball team. It was difficult to find articles about the baseball team. There's not a lot in the paper about their games. Basketball seemed to be the more interesting thing that they wrote about. Different teams locally as well as around the country. They would go play schools. They would play Tuskegee high school and so forth. So it showed that they were not just located in Middle Georgia, but they traveled around the state in Alabama and South Carolina. The football team. Now, one thing that drove me crazy about this picture was I found it by accident because ballot is misspelled there. It had put an I on the end of it when they typed it in at DLG. But this is just a quick article about the football team with them working out and so forth. So there was a lot. And Ballard played all of the American missionary schools, as well as other African-American schools around the state of Georgia at that time, as well as junior colleges. And they even went so far as to play Morris Brown in Atlanta. Next. The girls' sports, they were only allowed to play basketball if they could find another team. And one year they only played 2 games because there were only 2 schools that had girls' teams. And next year, I think they played 5. But this picture is very important. But the most important thing that was exciting, I stumbled across a picture on the Big Fives Foundation website. And it turned out to be a picture of Ballard team because they were talking about the Bloomers, the picture on the left. And so they have the picture. But I sent them a correction because they said it was the 19 teens, but actually, if you look at the basketball, it says 1923. Okay. We talk about the closure with the school that, a lot of it's financial, they're trying to raise money and so forth. And most people thought the school closed, but they actually called it a cooperative program. When they sent Ballard over into the public school system. And then we wanted to pique the interest of people today about what happened to Ballard. So we talked a little bit about Hudson High School, which was the public school that came into existence in 22. And then we talked about Ballard High School, which was a school when Ballard Normal closed. They did that for a short time, called it that. Next. And we talk about the merger of Ballard High. Became Ballard Hudson High School. People today call it Ballard Hudson Senior High because at some point they had a junior high school. Then we talked about Peter G. Appling, and then we talk about integration, which closes this separate educational time period for African Americans in Macon and Middle Georgia. Next. The reference sets we give here about the Digital Library of Georgia, as well as the books that we have in collections, and then even nationally, and going to the Amistad Center in Tulane for more information. Next. We give the credits and so forth, and I could not have done this without my staff. They were wonderful, and like Laureen said, they look over and revise and make suggestions and so forth. That's a great help. And then next, we did a browse items to show how many items we had from the Digital Library of Georgia. We had 4 of them, but they were very interesting and easy to work with. So if you decide to do a project, then come up with your topics, then go into the Digital Library of Georgia and review to see what's there and how you can use it or integrate it into your project. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Muriel. And last but not least, we have Evan Leavitt from Georgia College, who will talk about his exhibit on Central State Hospital.
Hey, everybody. So this project, it was a lot of fun. It provided me so many opportunities to add to my exhibit curation skill sets. Because I feel like more and more librarians and libraries are being asked to craft exhibits for their organizations. And, I know that for many of us, we have no formal training in it. And, I've been doing some exhibit work curation for a few years now for Georgia College Library. That whole other duties assigned caveat that you get. And, that being said, I haven't really had the opportunity to build a digital exhibit before. So this pilot program, really gave me an opportunity to learn. And because digital exhibits, I mean, they have so much power in providing accessibility to information. And this program really not only gives you, the ability to start to learn how to craft these things. It's just the nuts and bolts of exhibit creation itself, what goes into it and what you need to know to do to make it happen. So things like identifying who your audiences are and making sure that you're crafting your narrative to meet the levels of, their interests or expertise. The advisory team was so helpful. They provided, a really diverse base of knowledge and experience that provided these perspectives that they help you, the curator, to better understand, the legibility of your narrative that you're crafting, and also assisting you with actually building your exhibit structure. How does it flow? Can people navigate it without getting lost? If they enter the exhibit at any point, will they know where they are and where to go within that exhibit? Are the artifacts appropriately paired with text? And if the page is laid out aesthetically pleasing, things that were brought up that I hadn't really contemplated consciously before were things like the gaze. If you have a photograph of an individual, are they the direction they're looking, their gaze, is it directing you towards the text or away from it? And it seems like a little detail, but it really is important and plays into how people interact with what you're crafting. The experience also really grew my understanding of accessibility standards you need to consider when you're constructing digital exhibits. Things like it is my font a large enough size and legible? Am I utilizing all text on images? And these are all things that should be taken into consideration to make sure that your site is as accessible and usable as possible. Additionally, the program not only gave me the great opportunity to gain an in-depth understanding of the Omeka platform and how it works and what you can do with it. Because, there are limitations to Omeka. And I know as a graphic designer, I would get frustrated sometimes not being able to make it do what I want it to do or make it look the way I want it to look. But there are ways to work around that. And it was, I don't know HTML, I don't know CSS. So I've learned a little bit here and there now, which is good. I hope I can build on that. But it also gave me the opportunity to interact with departments across the university here to collaborate and build some pieces for the site that I wouldn't have been able to do on my own. But, so it gives you that opportunity to learn Omeka, but also provided, that one-on-one interaction with Omeka support staff, which was a really nice aspect of this program. And it also, through, trying to do my research and build my narrative, this experience gave me the opportunity to utilize some of the amazing open source resources that are available for people to use in digital exhibits, such as Storymap and Timeline.js that is provided through Night Lab, which is a digital storytelling initiative with Northwestern University. And these apps are really powerful tools and help you customize and utilize them in a way that brings in an interactive aspect to your exhibit that you might not be able to have otherwise. So Angela, if you want to go ahead and pull up my site, we can look at that real quick. All right, so.
Sorry, a little technical difficulty there for a second.
So my exhibit was on Central State Hospital. We focused on nursing in the nursing school at Central State. And you know, we have a separate IMLS funded grant that we are in partnership with the Twin Lakes Library System that came previous to this exhibit that where we're collecting oral histories of Central State Hospital. And we joined this pilot program because we thought that this would be a good companion piece to that project and provide us with an opportunity to learn Omeka and have that knowledge that we could apply to the other grant. So we start with our introduction and our statement on language used. And if you'll go to the next page. So after talking briefly about the formation of the hospital and what brought it about, I wanted to add in an element in this section that was interactive and kind of showed what Central State was in its early years. So I utilized Storymap from Night Lab to create a kind of tour of the Central State Hospital campus from a 1915 aerial drawing. And Storymap is really, really cool. It's not extremely intuitive to use. It took a little bit of messing around with it to figure out how to, one, I had to host the map image online. So I had to figure out GitHub, and of course there are directions on how to host things don't match up with, you know, the interface now, and it needs updating. So there's a lot of kind of trial and error, but once you get it together and start building it, it comes together pretty quickly. So I was able to zoom around the image and talk about the buildings and what they were utilized for and kind of their history about each one. So if you'll go to the next page. And then this is the other plugin that I use. This is Timeline.js. And it's very, very simple to use. It's just basically a Google spreadsheet. You input your information into the columns and publish it to the web. And then you just plop in an HTML code into Omeka and it populates it. So it's very easy to use, and it was a good way for us to try to give the contextual information we wanted about just mental health history in conjunction with the narrative we were presenting, just so that the viewer would understand just the long history of mental health treatment, not only in America, but also before. So this was a good tool for that. And so I highly recommend both of those plugins, and they have several more. And then there's other plugins online that do different things that are interesting. So, all right. And so briefly, for contextual stuff for the exhibit, you know, we discussed the evolution of just nursing training in the US, the talking about how it was formalized kind of casually at first, and became more and more organized and structured. And then talking about the early nursing training evolution at Central State Hospital itself, with them teaching just classes on the side in the basement of the center building, to creating a more formalized program, to then creating the nursing school itself. And then after that, we talked about the nursing experience in general at Central State Hospital in the 19th century, just the conditions that these young women were faced with and operated within. And because that's a piece of this narrative as well, to illustrate not only the conditions that people living with mental illness had to deal with at an institution such as Central State Hospital, but also the adverse conditions that the nursing staff dealt with as well, and hopefully illustrated the long battle that the hospital fought with the state, trying to secure funding and things to be able to, help better the situation for the nursing staff that was doing this work at the hospital. And then it was important to talk about the African-American nurses at Central State. And unfortunately, there's really not much history there. It's important to acknowledge and talk about the silences in the historical record, which is what we tried to do with this page, because there is a rich history there, and the first Black nurse, registered Black nurse in Georgia, was from Milledgeville, and she founded the first Black school at Grady for nursing in Atlanta, and so we have that connection back to our community, and then there was the first Black head nurse of a ward at Central State in 1912, which her name was Ruth Price at the time, and there's no mention of her name in the official records of Central State Hospital. So really had to try to find the history that we could on African-American nurses with the institution. And finally, we wrapped it up with talking about the School of Nursing at Central State, how it was formed, how it functioned, and and this was the genesis of the idea for the exhibit, was the official record book of the Central State Hospital School, which was the most viewed item on DLG in 2019, I believe. So that's kind of that was our starting point, and we built out from there. And there was thankfully a fair amount on DLG that we could utilize to for this exhibit to illustrate the kind of the points that we wanted to make. So in a nutshell, that's the exhibit. And then we had our references, and resources, that we suggest for further investigation into this subject. And if you'll scroll all the way down, Angela, to show the footer. So the footer was the biggest challenge. I wanted to be able to have that on each page so that all the links were there, and no matter where you were, you could access, the About This exhibit or the statement on language, in case you entered the exhibit at a point that wasn't the beginning. And so this was the collaborative part of the project right there, where I had to really trust other people to guide me, and I had a lot of help on that, and I appreciate it. So I would say in conclusion, I'll take all of these newly acquired ideas and concepts and incorporate them in my workflow in the future on digital and physical exhibits. And I plan to make many, many more digital exhibits for Georgia College Library. And, I would say my main takeaway from the experience was just the importance of multiple perspectives in the process of curation. This is really something that should not be done in a vacuum. And gaining insight from as diverse of a cohort as you can only makes your work stronger. And this experience provided that. And so I highly recommend participation in any future iteration of this program, and you'll learn a lot and you won't be disappointed.
Thank you so much, Evan. All right, so real quick, so we have time for questions. I'll talk a little bit about the next steps for the program. We have already renewed our Omeka contract, and we plan to open up the platform to a new round of public library applicants later this year. You can see the link there on the screen if you're interested in learning more. So a couple of things that we changed was to make sure that we included some information about an anticipated time commitment, since that was probably the largest piece of feedback we got, was that it's really important to know what you're biting off when you participate in the cohort. And we'll also be soliciting applications for a new round of advisory team members. So those will be coming soon. One thing I learned is that the transition from public librarian to exhibit curator can definitely be challenging, as all three of our curators alluded to. Any librarians who have been put in charge of their libraries' marketing and social media platforms will understand some of those learning curves. We know that librarians are well trained to provide cited sources and robust research documentation, which is really great for crafting the robust historical architecture of an exhibit, but can be tricky to transform into a compelling story. But as you can see, our curators have worked really hard to do exactly that. I'll be making some additions to the training curriculum to include a closer review of digital exhibits from other institutions, and also a dedicated rights training session so that it's really clear, or participants have a great understanding of what is reusable and what is not. And then the application form, as I mentioned, will include the anticipated monthly time commitment for participants. We're also working on creating an exhibit style guide specific to GPLS to help answer some of those questions about, like, reference formats and things like that. We plan to put all of that documentation on the GPLS website. Here are links to the various resources referenced throughout the presentation, as well as to the 2 tools that Evan mentioned he used to embed on his site. You have all of our contact information available in the slides and through Sched. And so I'm going to just pause here and see if in the last couple of minutes we have left in the session, if there are any questions that have popped up in the chat. I'm also going to stop sharing my screen.
So Angela, we haven't gotten any questions yet. I did want to let folks know not to be shy about asking questions. That we will be, we can extend the time a little bit for the session. So as long as our presenters are able to stay.
If I may, this is Muriel Jackson. One thing I would like to say, I'm going to use my exhibit as a springboard to gathering more information on various topics, especially in the African American community. We're at a stage now where people are getting more interested in documenting local places and events. So I'm going to use this as a springboard and explain that as they gather information and we locate more information, then we may be able to do an exhibit on a particular topic, person, or place.
I think that's such a great point, Muriel. Thank you for mentioning that. We definitely hope that, once our curators feel confident using the platform and working through the exhibit creation process, they will, have access to the Omeka platform to continue to create as many exhibits as they would like. And so, they won't be necessarily ushered through the process the same way that the new round of cohort members would, but we do want to really kind of cultivate a community of folks in public libraries in Georgia who are trained in this work, can ask questions of one another, share tips. I think that was a big value add in terms of having the 3 curators be in contact with one another and able to kind of see what other folks were using. And those footers, man, those footers were such a pain. So I know that there's probably folks who are very envious of Evan's beautiful footer, but lots of tip sharing and just great feedback all around.
So I actually have a question for our curators, exhibit curators. So I noted that some of you had difficulty finding materials in DLG that fit your topics. And so you digitize those materials. Are you going to be creating metadata for those so that we can include those items in DLG?
I hope to get it in there. I think you first have to take a break. Like if you'll see, a lot of the items I have were letters, sports letters and pennants and things like that. And there were other things. But that is another stage Angela had discussed with us, was trying to learn how to do the metadata so that it can be uploaded into DLG.
And to that point too, I think one of the things that we'll talk about with the next round of cohort members is, if you have an exhibit idea that you want to tackle, but that first requires digitization, that really has to come first before you can present the exhibit that you want to present. Let's plan for that and think of it as more of like a 2-year process that begins with digitization and then moves into a more curatorial storytelling process.
We've got a question from Kate Fisher. She's asking, what kind of community response have you seen from your websites?
If I could make a comment, we haven't really done the official launch yet with all the press releases and everything, but I was so excited about my exhibit that there's a Vintage Albany Facebook group, and I posted the link to my exhibit on there, and I've had really positive feedback from those people. Now, of course, those are people who were already interested in history, but it'll be interesting to see once we have the official launch. We'll learn more about that, the answer to that question.
And we're talking about or thinking through some presentations in the fall on this topic, so we'll have a little more data and information to share about the community reaction and feedback from the survey instrument that I'll be sharing to help inform what public outreach looks like, what the reactions have been, what do we see that folks are hungry for more of. So we'll have more information on that in the coming months.
Questions? All right, well, I want to thank all of our speakers today. This is a really exciting project, and really glad to see this kind of initiative with that creates a sort of cohort and a support community. And I want to also encourage public libraries to consider submitting a proposal to the program. So with that, we're going to say goodbye and have a great day.
Thanks so much, everyone.